Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Stosny, and welcome to Relapse Prevention in cases of chronic resentment, anger, or emotional abuse. Those conditions are susceptible to relapse because they are underwritten by lots of habits. And under stress, all animals, including humans, retreat to previously learned habits. But we want to distinguish right off the bat lapses versus relapse. Relapse is deliberately devaluing, demeaning, or frightening, making partners or children feel bad about themselves so they'll do what you want or stop doing what you don't want. So it's to inflict emotional harm. That is relapse, and that's unacceptable. Lapse is slipping into old habits, insensitive or dysfunctional, but not abusive behavior. Now, the most common lapses are blame instead of improving, focus on what you don't want, criticism, and that stirs defensiveness and stonewalling, monocular vision, and devaluing more than you value. And we'll take each one in turn. Blame versus improving. Blame lowers self-value. When you're not feeling good about yourself, that's when you're most likely going to blame others for how you feel. And the blame itself lowers self-value because you're not in control of your own self-esteem. It impairs your ability to create value and meaning. When you're blaming other people for how you feel, your life has less meaning and your experience, you feel less valuable. And it makes you powerless. The act of blame renders you powerless. If I feel bad and it's your fault, there's nothing I can do about it. Blamed emotions cannot motivate positive changes in behavior or well-being, and that's what negative emotions evolved to do, to motivate positive changes, heal, correct, and improve. That's the purpose of them. But when we blame them on other people, they can't do that. They just stir retaliation or revenge. They don't motivate healing, improving, or correcting. So well-being is sacrifice for the impulse to punish or retaliate. Now here's an exercise. List the last 3 times you blamed your partner or children for something. And then describe what you will do to improve similar situations in the future. See, when you want to correct, you never just dwell on a mistake. You always connect the mistake to a future correction because you have to train your brain what to do under similar circumstances, or else it's going to do the same thing. So always connect the mistake with the correction. Now here's an example. My wife left her shoes on the step and I fell over them, fell down the steps. In other words, wasn't seriously hurt, just sore. Now my instinct was to blame and yell, which would certainly not have made it better. Instead, I noted that the next time I'll look before going down the steps, which it is my responsibility to do. It's really not safe to walk down the steps without looking. I was carrying something and just not watching. Now, if I had blamed her, she would have probably been defensive. She would have felt bad about herself. And when people feel bad about themselves, they make more mistakes rather than fewer. But when I did not blame her, I just said, oh, I got to be more careful. She was very sympathetic to my injuries. See, when you blame someone, it's hard to get compassion. But when you take responsibility for improving the next time, you're more likely to get compassion. But at the very least, blame always makes it worse. And when you seek to improve instead of blame, it almost always makes it better. Now, focusing on what you want. When we're hurt, we tend to focus on what we don't want. Most partners want a closer, more connected relationship, yet they focus on what irritates them and what they don't like, which is never going to get them closer and more connected. And the reason is there are two psychological principles that we systematically violate. One is what we focus on becomes more important than what we don't focus on. In other words, the active focus creates an artificial importance, really. So you want to be sure you focus on what's really important to you, not what you don't want. Because the second rule is we're likely to get more of what we focus on. If you focus on negative things, you're almost certainly going to get more negative experiences. If you focus on what you want, then you've got about a 70% chance of getting it. Not always, of course, but it's better than focusing on what you don't want, which is virtually guaranteed to give you more of what you don't want. So the exercise is to list 3 things that bother you, changing the focus to what you want. Describe what you need to do to get what you want. So you list those things and then describe what you can do to make it more likely that you'll get what you want. Now here's an example. I don't want my clients to blame their partners because we've talked about how blame renders you powerless and always makes you worse. And I sometimes make the mistake and have to catch myself that, oh, you're blaming. In other words, I'm blaming them for blaming. What I want them to focus on is what they can do to make their lives better. So if I'm blaming them for blaming, I'm focused on what I don't want. But when I focus on helping them make their lives better, that's what I do want. Now, to achieve, I have to keep them focused on how they can improve their self-value, the situations they're in, and their relationships. So I try to always say, well, what can you do to make that a little bit better? What makes you feel better? What do you do that makes you feel better about yourself? How can you handle these situations better? All of those invoke the powerful part of your brain, the upper prefrontal cortex, and they will make your life better, where blaming will always make it worse. But that's what I have to keep focused on, because I sometimes will focus, like everyone, will focus on what I don't want. Criticism. Under stress, most people get critical, and that too will always make it worse. For one thing, criticism is ineffective as a behavior modification, because when you start criticizing, you do more and more and more of it. If we're effective, you could do less and less of it. And it always invokes defensiveness and stonewalling. So it gets you more of what you don't want. It's natural when people feel criticized for them to get defensive. It's not good. We don't want to be defensive in our relationships because that makes it worse. So the criticism makes it worse, and then defensiveness about the criticism makes it still worse. Now here's an exercise. We want to practice making behavior requests while showing value and respect, with focus on improving specific behaviors. So be very specific about the behavior request. Don't make it about personality or tendencies or character. Make it about specific behaviors. So instead of how many times do I have to ask you to wipe your crumbs off the counter? That's from my childhood. That's what my mother always did, and I was pretty bad at it. But, I know now why I was, because when you raise anxiety around something, it makes especially children scan, and when they're scanning, they're more likely to forget. You want them to focus, not scan. But anyway, you don't want to do that. Instead, you say, honey, I know it's not in your radar screen and it's not that important to you, but please try to remember to wipe the crumbs off the counter, and I will too. Now, you're far more likely to get cooperation with that kind of response because you're showing value and respect. You're not demanding that the crumbs on the counter are as important to your partner or to your children as they are to you. You're just asking for cooperation, and you're far more likely to get it and feel better about yourself. And usually what happens when you learn to do that, like in my relationship, I'm sort of the person, because of my mother, who doesn't like crumbs on the counter. And my wife didn't have that kind of mother, so she doesn't mind it. She forgets to do it. She tries to remember, but she forgets. So when she forgets, I don't mention it to her because I don't want to attract anxiety to it. And just for my own research, I kept track of how many times she would forget. And it was about 30% of the time. In other words, 70% of the time she'd remember. But early in our relationship, when I would be critical about it, she hardly ever remembered. So that proved the rule of my own personal little research project. But there are more scientific research projects that show that when you ask for cooperation, you're more likely to get it. When you criticize, you're less likely to get cooperation. Think of how you feel when you're criticized. You're not motivated to cooperate when you feel criticized. And you know, one of the ironies about criticism is that critical people are highly sensitive to being criticized themselves. It's partially because they tend to be self-critical, so when other people criticize them, it's like kicking them when they're down. They're highly sensitive to it. Okay, defensiveness. The problem with defensiveness and why it predicts divorce so accurately is that it invalidates the hurt of the complaining partner. See, I was surprised when that first was revealed to be a predictor of divorce it was about 20 years ago. Because therapists are trained that when the client is defensive, you're coming off too strong. You're sounding critical or attacking, back off. So defensiveness is just a natural response to feeling criticized or attacked. But in a love relationship, it's more subtle than that. When you're defensive, you're telling your partner you don't have a right to be hurt. And even worse, there's something wrong with you for being hurt because I didn't mean to hurt you. And that's the damage it does. So the trick is to focus on the hurt, not on facts and not on your intention. Let partners know that we want them to be well and we're sorry that they're hurt. That's more important than defending our intentions. And the irony is, if you focus on sympathy for the hurt, you don't have to say that you didn't mean to hurt them because it's obvious. If you care about the hurt, you didn't mean to do it. But if you defend your intentions, it appears that you did mean to do it. So it's a kind of paradox. You focus on the hurt, you don't have to say I didn't mean to do it. But if you say I didn't mean to do it, it sounds like you did. So here's an exercise. Describe 3 times your partner thinks you've been defensive in the past, because you're not likely to be aware of it. You think your partner's overreacting. But in fact, we all have blind spots of when we're defensive. We know when other people are, but we have blind spots of when we are. So describe how you will validate your partner's perspective and sympathize with any hurt in the future. So you take those 3 instances, and if you can't think of them, ask your partner, and then describe how you will sympathize in the future. Okay, here's an example. My wife is hurt because she thinks my tone of voice is patronizing. And it doesn't matter what I think or whether or not some objective person would think it's patronizing. It's her hurt. That's all that matters. She's right about her hurt. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound the way I did. I can be insensitive sometimes. You don't deserve that, and I'm sorry. Now that has to be sincere. You can't just, monkey the words or parrot the words. You've got to actually mean it. And the trick of actually meaning it is not focus on your intention, but focus on the hurt that it caused. That's more important than the intention. And then you can repair the hurt more easily. But it has to be sincere. I want to warn you about that. Because a lot of people, especially if you have a shame vulnerability, you want the hurt to get over, you want that person to get over it as quickly as you can, so you don't have to feel guilty. And then it's going to come off as dismissive. It's not going to seem sincere. So you have to really focus on the hurt. Now, stonewalling is a refusal to consider your partner's perspective. I don't want to hear it. End of conversation. Now, that's particularly hurtful to a high estrogen person because they need to connect under stress. Their great vulnerability is isolation. So when you're stonewalling, that makes them feel worthless. It's very hurtful. It's not as hurtful to a higher testosterone partner. Sometimes it's pouting. Sometimes it comes from feeling overwhelmed. And sometimes it's punishing, the silent treatment. Now, whatever the intention is, the stonewalling is a habit of retreating under stress. It's a habit. And you'll probably never use that because I've been doing this for over 35 years and I still, if I make a mistake, hurt my wife's feelings, I have an instinct to run and hide. Get over it. Just shut out. It was an accident. But I know if I do that, it's going to make it worse. So you always will have that instinct to retreat. But you have to fight it because correcting it takes a lot less time than indulging. And the way you correct it is you have to make a core value decision that our partner's well-being is more important than that habit of retreating, because it hurts the well-being of your partner, it hurts your relationship, and that's going to hurt you. So even though you feel like stonewalling, you have to try to connect. Now for this exercise, you want to describe the last 3 times you stonewalled and ask your partner if you can't remember it yourself, and you're not likely to because it's so reflexive. Describe how in the future you'll try to understand your partner, sympathize with any hurt, and express caring, especially when you disagree. Now, monocular vision is the inability to see perspectives of partners or children. So you're locked in your own perspective. And when you're resentful or angry, it is impossible to see other perspectives. When we can't see other perspectives, we guess. The brain will guess at what the other person is thinking or feeling. But the guess is always going to be based on how we feel at the moment. So if you feel good, your guess is going to be very positive. You'll assume the best about your partner. But if you feel bad, it's going to be negative. You'll assume the worst about your partner. And eventually that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy because nobody likes to have the worst assumed about them. They feel accused, they feel devalued. Now, binocular vision is the ability to hold your partner's or child's perspective alongside your own. The reality of the interaction is never just your perspective or just the other person's. It's both together. If you slipped into assuming the worst about your partner, just to begin, make no judgments until you can see your partner's perspective alongside your own. In other words, don't make a judgment about your partner's behavior or attitudes until you can really see his or her perspective. So here's a little exercise that can get you used to binocular vision, which is the #1 skill in relationships. Failure of binocular vision in itself produces resentment, anger, and eventually emotional abuse. When I feel angry, my partner feels blank. So when you feel angry, what does your partner feel? When I feel resentful, my partner feels. When I feel sad, my partner feels. When I feel hurt, my partner feels. When I feel anxious, my partner feels. When I feel frustrated, my partner feels. When I feel rejected, my partner feels. When I feel suspicious, my partner feels. See, if you don't get what your partner is feeling, whatever you're feeling is going to make it worse if you're only focused on yours, because you're going to want to punish your partner. You're going to want to devalue your partner in some way if you don't see that your partner is most likely feeling a similar vulnerability, if not the same one, although they're probably coping with it differently. So that's why binocular vision is so important. Now, valuing more than you devalue. If you value more than you devalue, your life will be good, even if a lot of bad things happen to you. And if you devalue more than you value, your life will be bad, even if a lot of good things happen to you. I have a couple of examples of both of them. One is, I used to work with a woman who had lost her only 2 children. One was a model child, a star athlete, and he was the #1 draft pick in the NBA draft out of college. And to celebrate, for the first time in his life, he tried a little cocaine. And because he had no tolerance to it, it stopped his heart and he died. So it was such a tragedy. And that part was in the news. But a lot of people didn't know was that her second son was murdered about a year and a half later. He was also a star athlete, but not on the same level. But he was big, he was tall, and he saw a teenage girl, a little bit younger than him, being bullied, almost assaulted in a mall by this other boy. And he intervened, being bigger, and the boy went out and got a gun and killed him. So she lost her only 2 wonderful children to this tragedy. And she was the most compassionate and kind person I've ever met. Now, she was religious, so that helped. God wanted her to spread compassion and light, and that's why he gave her this tragedy. Doesn't matter if you believe that or not. But it stirred her to value more than she devalued. And even with those terrible tragedies, her life was good. And the other side of it is I've been in the media a lot, and from that have gotten a lot of very wealthy and powerful clients, powerful politicians, a presidential candidate, lots of senators, plus a lot of billionaires. And it is remarkable how these rich and powerful people, how creative they can be at finding ways to make themselves miserable. And they do it because they devalue more than they value, even though they have lots of good things in their lives. So I like to quote Virginia Satir around that. She was one of the pioneers of family therapy in the 1950s. And what's remarkable about her is that we knew very little about neurology then, how the brain works. But she said that life is like a garden of rocks and flowers. The rocks are bad things that happen to you, and you can't do very much about them because they're in the past. You can't do anything about them. But you can always plant more flowers. And if you plant enough flowers, you don't notice the rocks. Now, what we've learned since then, in the last 20 years, that's exactly how the brain works. Whatever you focus on, you're training your brain to do more of. So if you focus on the flowers, you'll have more flowers and your life will be better. And if you focus on the rocks, your life's going to be bad. So for this exercise, describe at least 3 times when your partner and children have acted on their core value. So they did something that was compassionate or kind or true to their deeper values. Think about them, because you are prone to notice when they're not in their core value. And you want to get your brain used to noticing when they are, because whatever you focus on, you're going to get more of. And that brings us to core value, which is the immune system of the self. Core value is being true to the most important things to and about you. We all have very deep values. The deepest, the ones we come hardwired with, are the most humane ones. and that's being compassionate, kind, loving to the people you love. When you do that, you feel good about yourself. When you fail to do it, you feel bad about yourself. Regardless of anything else that happens to you, that core value determines how you feel. It's not determined so much by how other people treat you. It's determined more by how you treat other people. When core value is high, we're healthier and feel better. We concentrate more fully and work more efficiently, and we're more compassionate and humane. We like ourselves better. Now, when core value is low, and it does ebb and flow in all of us, it rises and falls. When it's low, that's when we're likely to blame, focus on what we don't want, criticize, fail to see other perspectives, and devalue more than we value. So all the lapses are going to occur when core value is low. So when the lapses occur, we got to raise core value. Okay, what follows are a couple of core value exercises, but we also have a free workbook on our website, compassionpower.com, for building core value. It's a PDF file that you can download, and it's under free stuff on our website. This is what I do that makes me lovable, and come up with 5 things. And I'll give you a hint. They're all going to be various acts of compassion and kindness. And they can be small acts of compassion and kindness. Holding a door for someone struggling, talking to someone when they're down, that kind of thing. And then acts of compassion and kindness I will do in the future. Emotions are always much stronger when you think of what you will do in the future and in the present, because they're primarily motivations and they can't motivate the past. So think about what you will do to raise your core value. And now play the core value narratives, which is the next webinar in this series. Because raising core value is the way to prevent lapses, and when lapses do occur, to prevent them turning into relapses. Okay, thank you for your attention and best of luck.